Okay, I want you to just sit with this sentence for a second. For centuries, Europeans consumed Egyptian mummies as medicine. I know, right? It sounds like a complete myth. It sounds like some bizarre plot from a gothic horror film. But it is a verified historical fact. Today, we are opening the vault on a history so dark and honestly so unbelievable that it has been largely swept under the rug. Welcome to this explainer on the cannibal apothecary, the dark secret of corpse medicine. We're launching what's basically a true crime investigation into a forgotten, incredibly gruesome medical history. We're going to trace the origins of corpse medicine, dissect the chilling justifications used by Europe's most elite doctors, and uncover the sprawling black market that literally commodified human remains. So, let's dive right in. Section 1, the cannibal apothecary. Let's set the scene. Imagine walking into a typical 16th century European apothecary. The air is heavy with the scent of dried herbs, myrrh, aloes, the usual stuff. But right alongside those standard botanical tinctures sits something far, far more sinister. Human remains. We're talking jars filled with ground-up skulls, vials of human fat, and dark, resinous powders made from embalmed flesh. And here's the craziest part. This wasn't some fringe back-alley operation. This was absolutely mainstream medicine. Historian Richard Sugg really hit the nail on the head when he described this era. He notes, the question was not, should you eat human flesh, but what sort of flesh should you eat? Literally everyone, kings, priests, ladies, gentlemen, and pioneering scientists routinely ingested human body parts. King Charles II of England actually had his own personal formula known as the King's Drops. It was a tincture of alcohol and powdered human skull that he sipped to preserve his health. But you really have to ask, how on earth did Europe develop this insatiable, macabre appetite? Section 2. A fatal translation error. The central mystery here is how a simple linguistic mistake birthed a centuries-long horror. Let's look at how this evolved. For centuries, traditional Islamic and Persian medicine utilized a substance called mumia. Now, what was that? It was just a rare, natural black bitumen or pitch found in Western Asia, and it was highly prized for healing cuts, bone fractures, and ulcers. Pretty normal, right? But then, in the 12th century, European translators, like Gerard of Cremona, made a catastrophic error. Because ancient Egyptians had used a similar-looking black bitumen to embalm their dead, Latin translators confused the natural mineral with the bodies themselves. They literally redefined mumia not as a mineral pitch, but as the substance found in sepulchres, mixed with the liquid of the human body. And then, by the 16th century, the definition expanded entirely. Mumia just meant the preserved human flesh itself. The contrast here is just staggering. On one side, you have real mumia, a harmless, naturally occurring mineral pitch from places like the Dead Sea. And on the other side, the misunderstood mumia, ground-up human flesh and stolen embalmed corpses. Basically, a giant linguistic blunder created a massive, lucrative, and entirely literal market for human consumption. Section 3. The Science of the Dead. Now, you might be wondering, how did highly educated doctors and scientists of the Renaissance and Enlightenment rationalize this? Well, they didn't see it as savagery at all. Actually, scratch that, they saw it as cutting-edge science. European medicine at the time relied heavily on homeopathic ideas, primarily the whole concept that like cures like. So if you had a headache or some sort of head ailment, doctors like Thomas Willis, who was a 17th century pioneer of brain science, by the way, prescribed powdered human skull. If you had gout, bruising, or wounds, you were prescribed human fat rubbed directly onto the skin. And for a lack of vitality or internal bleeding, you were prescribed fresh blood or mummy flesh. And it went even deeper into the supernatural. Physicians genuinely believed that ingesting human remains transferred the victim's life force directly into the patient. Blood was considered especially powerful because they believed it carried the actual soul in the form of vaporous spirits. The famous 16th century physician Paracelsus believed this so strongly that he gave mumia a totally new meaning, defining it as an intrinsic, mystical spirit inside everyone. To these doctors, swallowing blood or flesh literally meant swallowing the very vitality of the deceased. Section 4. The Counterfeit Corpse Market. As you can probably guess, Egyptian tombs, while plentiful, absolutely could not meet the booming European demand for mummies. So, an illicit black market emerged. Because if apothecaries couldn't get ancient mummies, well, they would just manufacture their own. There was a chilling, very literal recipe from a 17th century German physician named Oswald Kroll. It instructed apothecaries to make fake mummy by taking the carcass of a young, unblemished 24-year-old man who had died a violent death, meaning someone recently executed. Then you were supposed to cut musculous flesh from the thighs and arms, sprinkle it with myrrh and aloes, soak it in wine, and dry it in the open air until it looked like smoked meat. This horrifying commodification of executed criminals became a total staple of the medical trade. But of course, not everyone could afford these imported or highly processed apothecary drugs. So, for the poor, the execution scaffold itself became a makeshift pharmacy. People would crowd around the gallows in Germanic countries, paying the executioner a small fee for a cup of the condemned criminal's still warm blood. Executioners were generally viewed as social outcasts, yet suddenly they possessed these almost magical healing powers. And we really have to pause and talk about the staggering anthropological hypocrisy of all this. At the exact same time, European elites were routinely processing and consuming human fat, bone, and flesh for their own health. They were violently condemning Native Americans as savage, uncivilized cannibals. Through sheer cognitive dissonance, Europeans somehow reduced the bodies in their own apothecaries to simple biological commodities, entirely erasing the reality of what they were actually doing. Section 5. The demise of corpse medicine. Slowly, thankfully, the Enlightenment, better hygiene, and advances in the scientific method began to erode the belief in these cannibal remedies. People started using forks, bathing more regularly, and realizing that, ground-up skull didn't actually cure much of anything. Yet the practice lingered stubbornly in the shadows way longer than you'd expect. Get this, in 1847, an Englishman treated his daughter's epilepsy with human skull mixed in molasses. Into the 1880s, people still believed in thieves' candles, which were candles made from human fat thought to magically paralyze victims. Fast forward to 1908, and we see the last recorded attempt to drink warm blood at a German execution scaffold. And remarkably, as late as 1924, the German pharmaceutical company Merck still listed genuine mummy in its medical catalog, priced at 12 gold marks per kilogram. 1924. That's practically yesterday in historical terms. Section 6. Modern echoes of the trade. You might think this is all just some bizarre artifact of the distant past, but the commodification of the dead hasn't entirely vanished. It's just evolved. Today, we are still dealing with the legacy of this era. The British Museum, for instance, is currently at the center of a massive ongoing ethical debate about the colonial-era acquisition of Egyptian mummies. UK politicians have recently argued that displaying these ancestral remains without consent is deeply unethical and offensive. Many in the museum sector now insist on calling them mummified persons to restore the humanity that centuries of medical and historical commodification stripped away. But there's an even darker parallel today. On one hand, we have the incredible life-saving miracles of organ transplants and tissue grafts, medicine from the human body giving freely and with consent. But on the other hand, there is a grim global black market. From illicit organ trafficking rings to modern body snatchers literally stealing parts from funeral homes to sell to medical companies. The financial incentive to harvest the dead remains, it is a chilling echo of that 16th century apothecary. Which leaves us with this final, haunting question. Have we really stopped commodifying the human body, or has the black market simply moved from the apothecary to the operating table? The underlying belief that once a body is dead, we can do whatever we want with it is a shadow we haven't quite managed to outrun. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the past, and I'll catch you next time.